I started seeing Ava because I felt like I owed her for all the time she had my back. I chased after her for 3 solid years before she finally gave me the nod. At 20, we tied the knot. Then, out of the blue, she got knocked up and gave birth to Liam. But up until Liam was 7, our marriage was just a secret. I never threw her a real wedding. She was always on edge, constantly pushing my buttons, always doubting if I really loved her. If things didn't go her way, she'd snap at me with harsh words, and our kid, copying her, never learned to respect me. Then one day my mom passed away. I handled the cremation solo and came home totally wiped out, only to find that Liam had purposely locked me out of the house. It was pouring rain outside. I took off my jacket and wrapped it around the urn. I kept hitting the doorbell over and over. It was already evening, but the sky was dark as night. Thick clouds hung overhead with occasional lightning and thunder. The fierce wind was howling through the streets like the world was ending, just like how I felt. My cries were drowned out by the heavy rain. The sky seemed to cry with me, soaking me to the bone. I kept pressing the doorbell until I started banging on the door with my fists. Inside the small house, all the lights on the first floor were on, and I could barely see the big TV in the living room playing a funny cartoon. Ava was out on a business trip, but her son Liam was inside the cozy home. He heard me. He did it on purpose. Changing the door code after I left was something he did now and then. My constant doorbell ringing must have finally pissed him off. Liam hit the intercom, sounding annoyed. "Why didn't you leave a spare key when you went out? So dumb. Figure it out yourself." His still, childlike voice came through the speaker, muffled by the chaos around me. I leaned against the corner, wiping the rain and tears from my face to see better, trying to protect the urn with my body. I didn't want my mom to get wet. I couldn't take care of her when she was alive. Now that she's gone, this is all I can do for her. I struggled to hold back the choking in my throat and coldly told Liam, "I'm telling you one last time, open the door for me." The intercom light flickered a few times, and I could hear the TV faintly. Then Liam said nothing. The small light in front of me suddenly went out. In the silent world, I bent over and leaned against the wall, my eyes slightly red, my body stiff, standing as still as a statue in the storm. Maybe a long time had passed, or maybe just a moment. I calmly accepted that I had lost my son. Then I smiled, blinked, and softly said to my mom, "It's okay, Mom. Let's go home." With that, I turned away, walking determinedly through the rain. From that day on, I lost my mom, and Liam lost his dad. I caught a cab back to the southern part of the city, far from the bustling Liu family neighborhood. This area had few towering buildings, mostly old and aging apartment complexes. Yet, stepping into the narrow, dimly lit stairwell, I felt an unexpected sense of relief and peace. The warm, yellow, motion-activated lights flickered on with each step I took up the stairs, as if saying, "It's been a while, welcome home." But when I reached the 5th floor and stood in front of my familiar door, frustration hit me. I was out of cash. Raindrops dripped from my pants, quickly forming a puddle at my feet, and the cool breeze in the hallway sent chills up my arms. Without thinking twice, I knocked on the neighbor's door. It opened to reveal a guy with messy hair, wearing a tank top and shorts, a cigarette dangling from his mouth. We looked at each other, both stunned for a moment. I expected Uncle Mike to answer, but instead, I just nodded slowly, letting raindrops fall from my hair, and gave him a polite smile. "Sorry to bother you, but I think my mom left a spare key with you. Could you get it for me?" My old buddy, Tom, took the key out of his mouth, staring at my disheveled look with mixed emotions. Then he said coolly, "Wait a sec," went back inside, found the key, and handed it over. I took it, murmured a quick thanks, and that was that. Right now, I didn't have the energy to deal with our broken friendship. I forced a smile, took the key, opened my door, and stepped inside. I turned on the light, and the sudden brightness hurt my tired eyes, making tears roll down my cheeks. The house was clean and tidy, spotless, everything just like I remembered. It felt like my mom had just stepped out to grab groceries and would be back soon. I carefully placed my mom's urn on the table. My fingers accidentally touched a thin layer of dust, and I froze for a moment as tears started to flow uncontrollably. I had helped her escape a bad marriage, taking her away from that cheating, abusive jerk. I promised to buy her a big house, to make sure she'd live well, but she always said no. She said she was already doing fine, and that after I married into a wealthy family, the difference in our money would make people gossip, thinking I took a lot from my wife and that I was a gold digger. The money I gave her over the years, she saved almost all of it. It had become a small passbook along with her ashes, one of the few things she left me. After her divorce, my mom loved flipping through photo albums of me and Liam. Her rough hands left marks of longing on the pages. But whenever I brought her to stay at our place for a few days so she could see her grandson more, she'd often leave in a hurry after one meal. Ava didn't like having her mother-in-law in the house, treating her with politeness but coldness. And Liam, no matter how much I scolded him, always showed his disdain and annoyance toward his grandma. I thought I still had time to change all that, but who knew my mom had cancer and kept it from me? By the time I found out and took her to the hospital, it was too late. I sat in a chair, silently crying, full of guilt and regret. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I thought it might be Liam bringing the driver to find me, and my brows furrowed as I opened the door, full of anger. But outside stood Tom, holding a bowl of ginger soup, with a chubby little boy around 4 or 5 years old. Seeing me frozen, Tom sighed, took the boy by the hand, walked into my house without hesitation, and said, "You're soaked to the bone. Not going to take a shower and change? You're going to catch a cold." There were still plenty of my old clothes left at home, all washed, dried, and neatly stored in the closet by my mom. After showering, my eyes red from crying, I stepped out of the bathroom unsure what to do next. The TV was on, with a little boy sitting quietly on the sofa watching it, while Tom, like a pro, picked up a wrench and fixed the old pipes. As soon as the boy saw me, he sweetly called out, "Hey, Godfather." I paused, towel in hand, looking at Tom confusedly. He handed me a bowl of fresh porridge and nodded for me to eat. Then, in a calm tone, he introduced, "This is my son, Max. He's 5. I almost choked on the porridge, my eyes widening as I blurted out, "You guys got hitched?" It wasn't that I was overreacting, but since our school days, Tom had been all about not getting married. He often joked that when he had enough money, he'd just chill and enjoy life, and when he was done, he wouldn't burden anyone. If he had some spare cash, he'd open a retirement home for people like him. But Tom just raised an eyebrow and replied, "Who says you gotta get married to have a kid? Jake, you got any idea how many people see me as their unforgettable first love?" He explained that Max was a kid left to him by his ex-girlfriend after she cheated on him. She tried to win him back and failed, wanting to reconcile, but he cut her off completely. A woman who could ditch her own child didn't deserve to be a mother. He had once thought he'd live alone forever, but now he realized that raising a kid every day, eating, drinking, and enjoying life wasn't so bad after all. I glanced at Max with some concern. Years of brotherhood kept our bond strong. Tom knew what I meant without me finishing my sentence. He waved his hand dismissively, and Max immediately hopped off the sofa, running over with little huffs and puffs, looking up at his dad with bright eyes like a puppy's. Tom smiled and pinched his chubby cheeks, saying, "He's carefree, doesn't care who his mom is. I even bet he'd call anyone who gives him tasty treats and fun toys, Dad." Tom gave him a light tap on the back of the head, and Max instantly turned to me, wrapping his small arms around mine. He said, clearly enunciating each word, "Godfather, can I play with your phone? If I call you Dad from now on, would that be okay?" Hearing him call me Dad left me momentarily stunned. For years, Liam had been getting more unruly at home, always disrespectful, treating everyone around him with pure malice a kid could muster. And when he saw me get mad, it only made him happier. It all started one day when he didn't like the food and poured the leftovers over the nanny to show his dissatisfaction. In a fit of rage, I slapped him on the bottom. That was the first and last time I ever touched him because when Ava found out, she immediately called the cops, sending me to the station for a lesson, even threatening to have me locked up if I ever laid a hand on our kid again. After that, he started calling me by my full name, It had been so long since he last called me Dad. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat, feeling a mix of emotions towards Max's innocent dad. I patted his head, suddenly remembering a call Tom once made to me, and I smiled, saying, "That's right, I'm your other dad in this world." Max cheered, his chubby arms wrapping around my neck as he happily wiggled around like a fluffy golden retriever puppy. Tom's sarcastic tone came from above, making me think someone had totally forgotten their promise to me. I vaguely remembered one early morning, half awake, getting a frantic call from Tom. When I heard his panicked voice on the other end, I knew something was seriously wrong. Sure enough, he was out of breath, saying, "Jake, I've done what you asked, but something unexpected happened. I bought a train ticket for 3 a.m. and I'm leaving right away." But I cut him off before he could finish. "Tom, remember this. You'll always be my brother. From now on, your family is my family. Your parents are my parents. If you have siblings, they're my siblings. And if you have kids, they're my kids. Don't worry." So how could I forget? He's been my best brother for life. But as soon as I said those words, he immediately hung up. We lost touch after that. It wasn't until a year later we found out it was a false alarm, and he didn't need to wander without a home anymore. But after he came back, the Liu family paid him off and demanded he never show up around them again. Ava even banned him from contacting me, or the Liu family would find a way to throw him in jail. Thinking about it, I let out a long sigh. So many years had passed. Yet it felt like just a moment. Just then, my phone rang, and it was Ava. "Where did you go?" As soon as I answered, that familiar yet cold and distant voice came through. Tom signaled Max to lower the TV volume, then crossed his arms and glared at me from the side. Max glanced at his dad and then mimicked him, crossing his own little arms and blinking up at me with wide eyes, seeing the two of them so alike as if they were cut from the same mold. I couldn't help but chuckle when I didn't respond. Ava was silent for a moment, then her tone softened with a hint of pleading. "Liam can't sleep. He wants to hear a bedtime story from his daddy. Jake, please come back." "Okay, he's just a kid. Don't hold it against him." It was always like this. Every time Liam misbehaved, she'd just soothe him and indulge him. Even if he did something really wrong, she wouldn't let me lay a finger on him and would lash out at me instead. With a mom who always had his back, no wonder Liam didn't respect me as his father. She loved playing the role of the doting mother while forbidding me from being the strict dad. She thought it didn't matter, that he was just a mischievous kid who'd grow out of it. I let out a slow breath, feeling tired. I really didn't want to argue anymore. So I calmly asked her, "When are you coming back?" On the other end, Ava let out a light laugh, like she expected me to ask this, just before Ava left on her trip. A rich kid from her circle had sent me a photo. Drunk Ava, cheeks flushed, leaning against his arm, her hand tugging his tie, while the guy smirked. Nothing explicit, but the suggestive vibe was clear to anyone. At the time, I was already in a bad mood because my mom's illness was getting worse. Seeing that photo, I couldn't hold back my anger and had a huge fight with Ava. But she seemed to enjoy it, smiling as she watched me seethe with jealousy over her being with another guy. This wasn't the first time she did something like this, but it kept getting worse, to the point of absurdity. Ava was really good at being manipulative. She loved testing my feelings for her, trying to fill that never-ending need for security. Every time I lost my temper, she'd act hurt and tearful, saying she didn't want to act this way but was just afraid of losing me. This time, her excuse was that she was just trying to help the guy with his tie and accidentally fell into his arms. Furious, I demanded to know why she was even touching another guy's tie. As a married woman, didn't she have any boundaries? She shed a few tears, but I refused to back down, insisting she give me an answer. So she instantly grew cold, told me to calm down, and left me to get back to work, leaving for her trip the next day. And so, we started a Cold War. In the past, it never lasted more than 3 days before I made peace, but this time, Ava was still waiting for me to make the first move. 7 or 8 days went by, and Ava never heard from me. When Liam complained to her, she took the chance to call me, giving me a way to smooth things over. After her soft laugh, she asked, "Do you realize your mistake? Do you know what you did wrong?" She was waiting for me to apologize, to admit my fault, and sweet-talk her. Only when she was fully appeased would she forgive me, and as a reward, she'd say she'd be coming home the next day. It had been 10 years, and she never got tired of this routine. But now I was done with it. I stayed silent so long that Ava sensed something was off and tentatively called out. "Honey?" I mimicked her soft laugh, my tone casual, like talking about the weather. "Ava, come home soon. Let's get a divorce." After dinner, Tom and I ordered some drinks. Max came over, curious to try some, but Tom quickly scooped him up and put him back in the bedroom. He initially flailed his little arms and legs in protest, but within a minute he was sound asleep, snoring softly like a little piglet. Ah, the quality of a kid's sleep is something else. The two of us hadn't had a night like this in a long time. Drinking and reminiscing, our conversation flowed from funny moments of our youth to the big dreams we had in high school. Most of it was playful banter, with a touch of nostalgia, looking back on times we could now laugh about. But the more we drank, the more chaotic my thoughts became. It was like, in an instant, maybe triggered by one word, my mind was flooded with past and present troubles, all tangled up in a mess I couldn't untangle. One moment I was talking about how awful the school cafeteria food was, and the next, my thoughts drifted to the last time I was home. When my mom made a huge meal for me, she proudly said, "Maybe the food I make isn't as good as the Liu family's private chefs, but these are all your favorite dishes from when you were little. As long as I can still cook, I want to make them for you. Once I'm gone, you won't have them anymore." At the time, I just scolded her for saying such ominous things. But now, remembering it, guilt washed over me like a tidal wave. That day at the dinner table, she kept watching me, barely touching her own food. I can't remember her exact look, just that when Ava urged me to leave, my mom hurriedly got up and went to the kitchen to bring out 7 or 8 jars of pickled garlic she'd made, my childhood favorite. She carefully packed them into a bag, reminding me as she did so, "You have a bad habit of saving the best things for last, never wanting to use them. But when things spoil, it's a waste. What's the point of regretting it then? You should eat when it's time to eat. Do what you need to do. Let go of what needs to be let go. Some things, once they're gone, are gone. Don't hold on to memories and dwell in the past. You're my only son. Your happiness is more important than anything else. All right, go on now. Don't keep your wife waiting. Take these with you and let your wife and son try them too." I left in a hurry, giving my mom nothing but the sight of my back as I walked away. But because I came home late, Ava threw a huge tantrum, and those jars were all dumped in the trash that night. Thinking about it now, I suddenly found myself at a loss for words, drinking one glass after another. The bitterness spread through my mouth, and I couldn't tell if it was the memories or the alcohol that was more bitter. I took a breath and couldn't help but cough deeply. Staring at the glass in my hand, I gave a silent, bitter smile. Tom interrupted my thoughts, refilling my glass. He said, "Stop thinking about it. Just eat, drink, and let it all go. Get drunk, sleep it off, and let the past stay in the past. Tomorrow is a new day." My tears welled up, and I looked at him, choking on my words. My mom. He'd seen the urn. He knew everything. After a moment of silence, he gently patted my shoulder, offering no other words of comfort, just a single sentence that had carried us through 20 years of friendship. "Bro, I'm here." That night, Tom and I drank until we were both wasted, like back in our school days, sleeping in the same room. But this time, he slept on the floor instead of the top bunk. I felt like a piece of driftwood lost at sea, having left the safe harbor of my mom, but now finding a moment of peace on the ship of friendship. There was no love anymore, nor did I need it. With Tom and Max by my side, I slowly pulled myself together and started preparing for my mom's funeral. But a day later, Ava showed up at my doorstep with Liam. She looked as elegant as ever, wearing a meticulously tailored light blue dress made of expensive, delicate fabric. Her hair was styled, smooth strands falling over her shoulders, enhancing her already beautiful features. She held a box of homemade chocolate truffles, softening her otherwise cold aura. It was like nothing had happened. Her lips curved into a faint smile as she said, "Honey, let's go home." Okay. She knew I'd been attracted to her beauty from the start and often used it to her advantage, acting all flirty. Seeing that face usually melted at least half my anger. But this time, I stayed unmoved. I calmly told her, "I've got the divorce papers ready. They're in our bedroom drawer. If everything's cool, let's set a time to finalize it." The smile vanished from Ava's lips. Her gaze darkened as she stared at me. When she saw no hint of humor in my expression, she paused, then avoided the topic, pushing the well-dressed little boy at her feet forward. Her voice was cold as she said, "Liam, apologize to your father." Liam, dressed in a brand-name tracksuit, had his hands in his pockets, scowling with disdain. Hearing Ava's words, he refused to look at me, staring instead at the stairs, muttering a half-hearted sorry with obvious annoyance. Ava smiled and looked up, saying, "Honey, is that enough?" All I felt was a pounding headache. Did they really think I was that easy to placate? This mother and son duo clearly took me for a fool. My response was to slam the door in their faces with a heavy thud. It seemed like Ava didn't quite get what just happened. It was a while before my phone started ringing again. When I answered, Ava's angry voice came through. She was struggling to keep her cool as she asked, "Jake, do you really have to be this childish? Why are you being so petty with a kid?" Childish? Then what would you call all those melodramatic acts Ava pulled on me before? Was she just being shameless? I sneered back at her. "You don't have to come looking for me, Ava. Just seeing the two of you makes me sick." Ava's breath hitched abruptly. I had never spoken to her like this before, not even when I was totally exhausted by her willful behavior. I never showed her this level of disgust and weariness. In her eyes, I was supposed to be the person who loved her the most in the world, who cared for her the most. How could I say something like this to her? Ava's breathing showed her growing panic, as if she was scared of hearing anything more hurtful from me. She quickly hung up the phone. I held the phone in my hand, leaning back on the sofa and exhaled deeply. The truth is, Ava and I came from two totally different worlds. We never should have crossed paths. Ava came from a high-profile family. Her parents were big shots in the business world, and she was raised in luxury, a stunning beauty, cherished by everyone around her. The only regret was that her parents were too busy, so she was raised by her grandmother. Her grandma was elderly and doted on her too much. When she couldn't control Ava, she indulged her temper, turning young Ava into a spoiled, willful child. Then, one day, young Ava was kidnapped. The kidnappers were vicious, not only demanding a huge ransom, but also having some twisted desires. Although Ava was eventually rescued unharmed, the ordeal left her mentally shattered, and her personality changed dramatically. No one knew what she went through during that terrifying time. Afterward, her parents stayed busy, and only her guilt-ridden grandma stayed by her side. Years later, I was in a car accident, and my family couldn't afford the treatment. The person who hit me was even poorer than my family. I was on the verge of dying in my hospital bed when Ava's grandma stepped in to save me. By then, she was very old, sitting in a wheelchair, leaning on a cane, her face weary but her eyes still sharp. She looked into my family background and spent a few days getting to know me, then asked if I'd be willing to make a deal with her. She said she had saved my life and hoped I would, in turn, save her granddaughter. Her granddaughter Ava was still very young, beautiful, and smart, but as cold as ice, cutting herself off from the world. She didn't want to watch Ava live a lonely life or spiral into self-destruction, but she didn't have much time left. I didn't know how to repay such a life-saving debt, and it felt like I had no choice but to agree. That day was just 3 days before I was supposed to start at the prestigious university I had worked so hard to get into. I had already planned to work part-time during university, graduate, find a good job, and then help my mom divorce that jerk. I wanted to give her a good life. My future was bright and within reach. But reality turned out differently. My mom successfully divorced, but I never went to university. I was sent to the Liu family by Ava's grandma, where I devoted myself entirely to getting close to Ava, warming her, healing her, letting her step on my bones as she climbed out of her abyss. When she finally dared to leave her comfort zone and step into the sunlight, my fate was already tied to hers. Ava's grandma passed away peacefully, without any regrets. But she never told me how long I had to repay this life-saving debt, or when all the help I had received would be considered repaid. Ava didn't know any of this. She had become completely dependent on me. Even though I had been by her side for 3 years, she still feared I'd suddenly disappear and leave her. So, she wanted to keep me with her forever. As soon as she reached the right age, she quickly arranged for us to get our marriage certificate. But even with that certificate, she still felt uneasy. Every day she would come up with new ways to ask me, "Do you love me?" I tirelessly responded, "Yes, I love you, I love you." After all, I had been by Ava's side since I was 17 and had never been in a relationship before. Besides, Ava was super beautiful. Sometimes when she lowered her long lashes and stared at me without blinking, my heart would really race. Her condition improved significantly after she got pregnant with Liam. Around that time, Ava, who had always thought she was an only child, unexpectedly found out her parents had secretly had a son, and he was already nearly 10 years old. Feeling helpless and wronged, she turned to me for help. With my support, she began to fight for power in the company. I enticed and Tom pressured, and with Ava being naturally smart, she quickly gained the shareholders' support. After she successfully seized power, she no longer feared the outside world, but she gradually began to neglect me. Yet she still held on to her old habits with me, loving to see my emotions swing wildly because of her, enjoying seeing me get mad on her behalf. From these intense emotions, she would happily draw the love she needed. It's been 10 years. For 10 years, I've been her husband who wasn't fit to be seen. In her social circles, I was kept in the shadows, and in her company, I was like a ghost, invisible and irrelevant. The reflection in the mirror showed a man with hollow, tired eyes, as if all vitality had been drained from him. Meanwhile, Ava had transformed like a phoenix rising from the ashes, becoming more mature and elegant, her aura even more dignified and refined. Time seemed to have barely left a trace on her exquisite face. But I could hardly remember what 17-year-old Ava was like when Jake first met her, or what 20-year-old Ava was like. The one so full of love for Jake, dreaming of marrying him, needing to cling to him every night to fall asleep. I couldn't remember, but I did remember that we still hadn't had our wedding. I once said I'd use the money I'd saved over the years to give her a grand wedding. She hesitated, saying it might be better not to. Seeing my confusion, she tried to explain. "I want a wedding with just the two of us. You've done so much for me. So on our wedding day, I want to be the one to confess to you, and I'll ask you over and over again if you love me. You only need to answer, 'I love you.' No one else needs to witness it. I'll remember that moment forever, knowing that you will always love me." How could I not understand the hidden meaning behind her words? 10 years had passed, and those painful yet happy youthful days were gone. My mom's death was a wake-up call, finally pulling me out of the foggy dream I had been living in. I realized what needed to be done had to be done, and the past had to be left behind. I couldn't hold on to it any longer. Since Liam didn't need me as his father, I would leave him with the Liu family. In a way, this could be seen as life for a life. The debt of gratitude should have been repaid long ago. From now on, I would no longer be Ava's husband, nor would I be Liam's father. I would just be myself. I would be Jake, the Jake who picked up the university acceptance letter he missed at 17, ready to set off on a new journey. My mom's funeral was a simple affair. After all, she had been married for many years, dedicating herself entirely to the family. Relatives had become distant, and friends had lost touch, so hardly anyone came to her funeral. I saved the money and chose a burial plot with a beautiful view. At first I bought one plot, but later I got 2 more because Tom insisted on copying the tradition from the outlaws of Mount Leong. He said that if Jake were to be buried here in the future, he planned to be buried here too. Brothers in life, brothers on the road to the afterlife, and companions in the next life as well. Max, fully agreeing, raised his little hand and said he wanted a plot too. Tom flicked his forehead, telling him, "You can choose one when you grow up. You're too young now. If you don't like it after we buy it, you'll make a fuss." What had originally been a heavy matter was made so light and lively by them that the sorrow weighing on my heart was considerably lifted. Max, feeling a bit disappointed about not having his own burial plot, held my hand on the way back and said, "Dad, then buy me an ice cream. That'll make me feel better." Tom scolded him. "What are you sad about? You already had a cone this morning, and now you want another. Planning to lose all your teeth?" Max, a master at looking pitiful, gave me a pleading look. I was speechless, just considering whether to buy him one or not. A sharp shout suddenly rang out from behind. "He's my dad. You can't call him that." Liam appeared out of nowhere and pushed Max hard, knocking him to the ground. Max caught himself with his hands, but the tender skin on his palms got scraped and started bleeding. He bit his lip and tears welled up in his eyes as he cried out, "Dad!" Anger surged within me as I helped him up. I glared coldly at Liam, who stood there with clenched fists and red eyes, staring back at me stubbornly. His pupils contracted slightly, his expression defiant, his tone accusatory as he reminded me, word for word, "I'm your son." I immediately frowned and said to him, "I don't have a son as despicable as you." Liam froze on the spot, and when he finally snapped out of it, tears streamed down his face in big drops, but he still stubbornly tried to hold back his sobs, wiping his tears away with his sleeve. He looked up at me, eyes full of defiance, and shouted, "If you don't go back, Mom's going to leave with another man." I knew that. Lately, I'd been getting a lot of taunting texts and photos of Ava being intimate with different young guys. Blocking and deleting them didn't help, so I ended up getting a new phone number. Ava hadn't learned a thing. She still believed this tactic would always work on me, but I didn't care about her anymore, so why would I care about what she did with anyone else? My expression stayed calm as I gently patted Max's back, soothing him. But with Liam, I was completely indifferent, saying, "That's perfect. You can just get a new dad." Liam looked at me in disbelief, as if he was just now realizing my attitude toward him had completely changed, and that maybe I really didn't want him anymore. Liam, still a kid, couldn't hold back his sobs any longer and started crying loudly, clinging to my legs, sitting on the ground and refusing to let go. Crying so hard he started hiccuping. You have to come back with me. You can't be someone else's dad." Max had already stopped crying. He looked down at Liam, who was crying and throwing a tantrum on the ground with wide eyes. Then he frowned and said to me disdainfully, "Dad, I don't want this brother. He cries so ugly." Liam heard this, and his crying stopped for a moment. I took the chance to pull my leg free, then coldly glanced at the bodyguards watching from the side of the road. I said, "Don't worry, he's not your brother. You don't need to care about him." The bodyguards hesitated before stepping forward to help their young master up, Liam. His eyes glazed over, looked up at me, as if my words had truly hurt him. But I simply took Max's hand and turned to leave. I didn't spare Liam another glance. Getting the divorce certificate from Ava wasn't easy, especially when she finally realized and learned about my mom's passing. The nonstop stream of taunting texts and flirtatious photos with various socialites suddenly vanished, leaving me in peace. When Ava showed up at my door again, she wasn't wearing a designer dress, nor had she done her hair. Her hair hung loose, her face pale and drawn, looking pretty pitiful. It was clear she wasn't in a good state. It seemed she finally realized that when I said I wanted a divorce, I meant it. Some things needed to be discussed, so I let both of them in. Liam was unusually quiet this time. He stood beside Ava, clutching her skirt, but his eyes were fixed on me, filled with cautious longing. But no matter how he looked at me, I didn't return his gaze. I acted like he didn't exist. Ava sat across from me, her expression showing guilt as she softly said, "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't know your mom's illness was so serious. Why didn't you tell me earlier? If I had known, I could have hired the top medical team in the country to treat her. No matter the cost, I'd make sure she got better." I felt calm as I told her, she was in the late stages of cancer. It was untreatable. Telling you wouldn't have changed anything. And besides, she was my mom, not yours. You never even called her mom. So why suddenly care now? It's only natural you didn't pay attention. On the day she passed, I was with her the whole time. She had no regrets. She was at peace. Ava's pupils trembled, and her face turned even paler. She forced a dry smile, weakly saying, "We're married, so she was my mom too." Her words were laughable, as if she had shown her any respect or care while she was alive. I couldn't help but sneer out loud. Ava closed her eyes in embarrassment. After a moment, she changed the subject, saying, "I'll have the Liu family take care of the funeral. No need." I couldn't stand her pretense any longer, so I cut her off. I took out a document I'd prepared earlier from under the table and pushed it toward her before I could say anything. Ava suddenly stood up, her voice breaking. "Jake, don't do this." Her eyes were red, and she was trembling uncontrollably. She grabbed my hand and fell to her knees in front of me. Her voice was almost pleading as she said, "You can't. I won't agree, honey. I'll never agree to a divorce." I slowly pulled my hand out of her grasp before she could completely lose control. I pointed to the document on the table and said, "Read it first, Ava." She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the document. Seeing it wasn't a divorce agreement, she let out a sigh of relief. But as she continued reading, her brows furrowed deeper and deeper. Her hands began to clench around the pages. Her breathing grew rapid as she flipped through it with increasing urgency. When she reached the last page and saw my signature, written with a shaky hand from years ago, Ava's eyes were red with anger as she spat out, "A transaction. All those years you spent with me, loving me, was it all just to repay a debt to Grandma? A transaction?" The document in her hands was the contract I'd signed with Ava's grandma all those years ago. It clearly stated that everything I'd done for Ava over the years wasn't out of love, but rather as fulfilling a contract. A series of demands laid out in black and white. Ava stared blankly at the printed words for a long time, and at that moment, I delivered the final blow with a smile. "Ava, why don't you ask me again if I love you?" Ava stormed out, leaving behind a quietly sobbing Liam, clutching his clothes and refusing to leave. He didn't fully understand the argument between his parents, the contract, or the transaction. But he understood one thing. Dad was going to divorce Mom and leave them. He slowly walked over to me, his tear-streaked face showing none of the defiance or arrogance it once did. His eyes filled with fear and uncertainty as he hesitantly took hold of my hand, choking out, "Dad, I'm sorry." It had been a long time since I'd heard him call me Dad, but now, looking at Liam and hearing him call me that, all I could think of was that rainy evening when he locked me and my mom out. I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy for him anymore. In fact, as I looked at him, all I felt was burning anger deep within me. We were father and son, bound by blood, yet he had only ever cared about his bond with his mom. As for me, his dad, born into poverty, he couldn't even bother to glance my way. He had no respect for my mom and looked down on my background. To him, only his mom was worth caring about. Yet, because Ava disliked the school environment, I was the one who attended every parent-teacher meeting and event. And on the rare occasion that Ava attended, he'd be overjoyed, proudly introducing his beautiful mom to all his classmates. I shook his hand off and sneered at him, saying, "What, Dad? I'm just your caretaker, aren't I? Just a caretaker you can't get rid of, one who disciplines you, which is why you hate me and have done everything you can to drive me away, right?" "Well, Liam, you've finally gotten your wish." Liam shook his head desperately, pretending to be ignorant as he tried to hug me. "No, you're my dad." I pushed him away, gripping his shoulders to make him stand up straight, and said, Liam, you're not a little kid anymore. If you can't respect my authority, then I won't treat you like a child. You're a man now, so you need to bear the consequences of your actions. I called the bodyguard who had been watching over Liam and told him to take him out of the house. As I was closing the door, I remembered what Liam had said to me through the intercom that rainy day when I was soaked to the skin. I smiled slightly and softly said to him, "Your dad doesn't want you anymore, Liam." The door slammed shut. Liam threw himself against it, banging and crying, his wails echoing through the hallway, but no one came to comfort him. A few days later, Ava asked to meet with me. She agreed to the divorce. I stared at the text message for a long time, then grabbed some things and went to the meeting on time. Ava was wearing a tailored black dress, her expression cold and distant, exuding that untouchable elegance once again. On the table lay the divorce agreement I had drafted earlier. I was asking for $50 million in cash. I didn't want the car, the house, or the kid. Given the work I'd done for the company over the years, this amount was more than enough. And for Ava, it should have been within an acceptable range. Additionally, I planned to keep the shares Ava had given me during our relationship. Ava quietly watched as I signed my name on the paper. When I pushed the agreement toward her, she didn't make a move to take it. Instead, Ava curled her lips into a bitter smile, staring at me as if she was about to spit out her words through gritted teeth. "You deceived me, and you think you can just walk away and leave me behind?" I looked at her for a moment, then calmly asked, "Do you want to take revenge on me?" Ava let out a scornful laugh, leaning forward as she replied in a cold, contemptuous tone, "Do you think you're worth it?" Her gaze swept over my face inch by inch as she bitterly said, "You want to leave, to abandon me, but I won't let you have your way. I'll make sure you stay by my side forever. You won't be able to go anywhere." We stared at each other in silence, locked in a tense standoff. After a long time, I sighed, reaching into my bag and pulling out a stack of medical reports. "I'm seriously ill, Ava." Ava froze, the icy mask on her face slipping away completely. She snatched the medical reports from me. Her slender fingers trembled as they brushed over the dark mass on the ultrasound image. How strange. She always seemed to remember to look back only when she was about to lose something. But when everything was fine, she never seemed to care. "When I was sick, you never said a warm word to me. But when you're ill, if I fail to take care of you, you accuse me of being uncaring and insensitive. Then you throw a fit, blaming me for not pampering you even when I was unwell and for making you angry. Are all women like this? It doesn't matter anymore." I said calmly, "Sign the papers, Ava. I'll only agree to treatment after we're divorced." Ava looked up at me, frowning and slightly parting her lips as if to say something. I stared into her eyes and added, "My health isn't good. If the treatment fails, I don't have more than a few months left. Don't make me die with regrets." "Okay." Ava fell silent. After a long pause, she finally picked up the pen and signed the divorce agreement. I had everything prepared, and while she was still processing it, I pushed her to finalize the divorce at the registry that very afternoon. With the divorce certificate in hand, I breathed a sigh of relief. I was finally free. As we left the Civil Affairs Bureau, Ava suggested I return to the Liu family home, but I refused. She frowned and said, "In your condition, how can you manage on your own? At home, Mrs. Jane can take care of you." Besides, I raised the divorce certificate and waved it in front of her. Ava glanced at my pale, frail face and fell silent, but she couldn't help asking, "When will you come back?" I could guess what she was thinking at that moment, since I wouldn't live long without treatment. She believed she had to comply with my demands for now. Once I recovered and everything was back to normal, she thought she'd have plenty of chances to reconcile with me. She never truly believed we would be apart for good, but that's okay. I'd give her time to come to terms with reality. My cab arrived at the curb and I got in, watching Ava hesitate as if she wanted to stop me but wasn't sure. It was almost amusing. It seemed she only wanted to hold on when something was slipping away, and only wanted to cherish it when it was already lost. as if her sincerity always came with conditions attached. For the sake of my peace in the days ahead, I warned her, keep an eye on Liam. Don't let him show up in front of me again. And that goes for you too. With that, I told the driver to go, leaving Ava standing there with a grim expression. Tom and I had once promised each other a spontaneous trip together in our youth, but for a while we doubted we'd ever get the chance. But now we had all the time in the world. When I got back and told him the good news about my divorce, he immediately opened a bottle of his father's 20-year-old vintage wine to celebrate with me. The next day, we began our journey, traveling all over the country. We took Max with us, visiting the vast herds of cattle and sheep on the Heelenberg grasslands, the sun-kissed peaks of Tibet, the first snowfall at the Forbidden City, and the misty, rainy season in the south. We had the time of our lives. Max was full of energy, not only keeping up with the pace, but also being the best cheerleader, the perfect little companion. In the freedom of the open air, I felt like I'd come alive again. With my best friend from the past and his kid, I traveled to every place that had once been a dream of our youth. It was like the soul that had been trapped in that hospital bed at 17 had finally awakened 10 years later. Of course, the journey wasn't entirely smooth. My phone was nearly flooded with calls from Ava. I didn't have a terminal illness. That was just a lie to get her to sign the papers. When Ava first found out the truth, she was absolutely furious. She nearly flew to Lijiang to confront me, but I just said, "We're already divorced. Can't you let go, Ava?" That shut her up, because if she couldn't let go and kept chasing after me, it would make her look like a lovesick fool, which would be a disgrace to the Liu family's eldest daughter. So Ava stopped contacting me, just like during the countless Cold Wars we had in the past. Only this time, I wouldn't be the one to call her and beg for reconciliation. This time, I was relieved. These trivial, meaningless matters would no longer disturb my peace of mind. I opened my arms and embraced this new world that belonged to me. A year later, when Max was ready to start school, we ended our joyful travels. However, the day we returned home, I saw that familiar figure again. Ava was standing downstairs, staring up at my window. She looked as graceful and elegant as ever, standing out from the surroundings, drawing the attention and whispers of the neighborhood. I went about my day, eating, showering, changing clothes, until night fell and I was ready to sleep. She was still there, like a statue waiting for her husband's return, sighing. I went downstairs to see her. When Ava saw me, her face lit up with joy. She smiled and said, "Jake, I knew you couldn't stay away from me. Come home with me. This past year, Liam has been crying and misbehaving, even neglecting his studies, all because he wants to see his dad." Seeing that I remained unmoved, Ava's voice trailed off. The evening breeze rustled the leaves, and the old streetlight cast a faint glow beside her. Finally, she dropped the pretense of using the kid as an excuse and quietly said, "I've missed you. I'm sorry." I suddenly laughed and asked her, "Exactly. What are you sorry for?" Ava's eyes brightened instantly. She stepped closer, speaking quickly. "I never cheated on you, not physically or emotionally. You know me. I just wanted to see if you still cared about me. I'm sorry about your mom, and I'm sorry for hurting you with my selfishness." She went on, saying that she hadn't stopped thinking about me for a single day this past year. She said she had seriously reflected on everything, but none of that mattered to me anymore. I told her, "Look, you've managed just fine without me this past year, Ava. It's not that you can't live without me. You're just used to having me around, and you don't want to let go." Ava's eyes reddened suddenly, and she shook her head, insisting that wasn't true. But I asked her, "Why don't you ask me that question anymore?" Ava's lips trembled, and her expression showed fear. She pressed her lips together, refusing to speak. So I sighed and answered for her. "Yes, I did love you. What do you think kept me by your side for so long? If it was just to repay a debt, I could have left as soon as I helped you take over the company." Ava forced a smile that was more heartbreaking than tears. and she reached out to hug me, but I held up my hand to stop her and took a step back. Calmly, I said, "But that's all in the past, Ava. I've completely let go of you, and you should move on too." Ava couldn't let go. When she couldn't let go, she clung to my arm, tears streaming down her face as she repeatedly muttered her refusal. She couldn't accept the reality that I no longer loved her. She started begging, desperately digging through her memories for the good times we had shared, but I resolutely pulled her hands away, pushed her back, and turned to go upstairs. That night, Ava cried so loudly outside that the entire neighborhood couldn't sleep. Eventually, someone called the cops for disturbing the peace, and the officers took her away. The next day, Ava returned to the neighborhood, her eyes swollen, and fell asleep in her car. On the third day, I passed an online interview with a big company, quickly packed my bags, and left while Ava wasn't paying attention. Later, Ava showed up at my new job a few times, but I either avoided her or spoke harshly to her. After being together for so many years, she knew how to hurt me, and I knew what words would truly cut her deep. Gradually, she stopped coming. Then I got a call from Tom. He told me, exasperated, that Ava, or sometimes Liam, would show up at my old house to stay. In my rush to get divorced, I had forgotten to change the locks. I was silent for a long time. Finally, I said, "It's fine, let it be. When they're ready to move on, they'll stop going there. Until they leave my house, I won't go back. My life has restarted." This time, I'd move forward without looking back.